Καλησπέρα και καλώς ήρθατε σε άλλη μια λέξη εκφραστικής ανάγνωσης εν μέσω κορονοϊού 2020. Σήμερα θα διαβάσω ένα κεφάλαιο από το δεύτερο μυθιστόρημα στον κύκλο των επιπλέον ιστοριών από τον κόσμο του Avatar The Last Airbender. Είναι η συνέχεια του The Rise of Kyoshi που είχαμε πριν από μερικούς μήνες. Σήμερα είναι η πρώτη φορά που θα πω spoiler alert. Όσοι δηλαδή θέλετε να διαβάσετε το μυθιστόρημα, κλείστε το βίντεο. Γιατί το κεφάλαιο έχει ορισμένα στοιχεία σημαντικά. Όσοι δεν ενδιαφέρεστε να το διαβάσετε ολόκληρο, δεν θα κλείσετε το βίντεο. FCE with Avatar co-creator Michael Dante DiMartino, The Shadow of Kyoshi. A ritual. Kyoshi drifted on her great raft of a bed in the red ocean of the Avatar's quarters. She couldn't tell how many times she'd been woken up throughout the night by her dreams. Each time her eyes opened, she would stare up at the painted ceiling, her mind racing until her vision blurred into the patterns of swirling crimson. She was wide awake and already dressed when a servant came to rouse her. Nor was she surprised to hear that Rangi and Heiran were also up, waiting to speak with her. The servant guided her to a balcony on an upper floor, set with a small table for breakfast. The sunrise view was marred by the grey wall that ringed the palace, but they were high up enough to see light peeking over the edges of the caldera. The Fire Nation capital, residing in a dormant volcano, was common knowledge, but Kyoshi had never considered what the view would be like from inside the sunken depression. She could have been sitting on the palm of a giant, its stone fingers threatening to close around her. Rangi and Heiran were already wolfing down their breakfast of bland gruel and salted vegetables. The blazing spices and oils that had slathered the party food now lay at the side of the table in small pots to be added to taste. Even Fire Nationals took a break from hot flavors first thing in the morning. Kyoshi was always amused by how swiftly Rangi plowed through her meals, her delicate features at odds with her voracious consumption. Her mother was no different. They'd probably developed a habit in the barracks of eating as fast as possible to avoid wasting time. "Sit and eat first," Heiran said to Kyoshi, pointing at the food with her chopsticks. "We're going to need our energy, and I hear you're in the habit of skipping meals." Rangi watched Kyoshi's every bite, a fresh humiliation brought on by Jinpa's tattling. The Avatar was no longer trusted to feed herself properly. "I'm going to get you back for this, monk," Kyoshi thought as she chewed and swallowed under Rangi's scrutiny. "Somehow, someday." Once they finished, Heiran leaned back in her chair and let silence fall over the table. She watched the light extend its reach across the grounds. "So," she said, "Yun wants to kill me." The sound of Rangi's knuckles tightening could be heard in the morning stillness, but Heiran stated it dryly, like she was noting the color of their napkins, a detail in an official report. "He escaped not only the palace, but a full lockdown of the caldera," she went on. "All ports in the capital have been closed. The festivities in Harbor City are on hold while the search continues house to house. No luck yet, though." Kyoshi was both impressed and disturbed by how efficiently the Fire Nation could conduct a manhunt. "Maybe there's another angle that could help us find him?" She told them her conclusion that had germinated in the gallery and taken full root overnight. She'd discussed the possibility with Rangi, but Heiran was hearing it for the first time. "You think the spirit that identified you as the Avatar has possessed Yun," Heiran said. Kyoshi nodded. Jianzhu called it Father Glowworm. He said it fought with Kuruk in the past. This spirit could be controlling him, or maybe it altered his mind? She noticed Rangi frown deeply, but put it aside for now. I've never heard the name, Heiran said. During the time our group spent together, spiritual excursions were never Kuruk's focus, to say the least. Kyoshi sorely wished people would stop dancing around Kuruk's tenure as the Avatar with euphemisms. She didn't see what her predecessor had done to earn the favor. Back in Yokoya, I pulled apart Jianzhu's libraries, searching for mentions of a spirit fitting the description, but found nothing. I was hoping you would have some recollection. Better to ask Kuruk himself. Kyoshi thought Heiran was brushing her off until she remembered she was supposed to be able to commune with her past lives. The statement was meant literally. It would have been foolish to hide her spiritual troubles any further, so she gritted her teeth and confessed. I can't, she said. I can't fully reach Kuruk or any other avatar. To her surprise, they weren't upset. Communing with her past lives is one of the most difficult and complex feats an avatar can perform, Heiran said. Successful methods and experiences have been known to vary between generations. I wouldn't advertise your problem, but I wouldn't beat yourself up about it either. Kyoshi was relieved down to the bone. In one matter regarding her broken, rocky avatarhood, at least one matter, she wasn't at fault. What a difference it made having someone older and wiser to give her advice. Heiran stared over the edge of the balcony and drummed her fingers against the table. I have an idea, she said. I know a friend of Kuruk's who spent more time with him after our original group went its separate ways. He used to be a fire sage, stationed in the capital, but these days he maintains a small shrine in North Chongling. He's an expert in spiritual matters. If anyone could give us answers, it's him. North Chongling? The town name held some meaning that Rangi disapproved of. We couldn't go to the real fire sages? They're in the pocket of the Sawon clan, Heiran said. The High Sage is Chaijin's maternal great-uncle, but my contact might know more about this Father Glowworm creature, especially if it has a link to Kuruk. If the Avatar successfully fought it in the past, perhaps it can be defeated again now. The idea of her predecessor being useful to Kyoshi was a new one, but it filled her with hope. Kuruk's friend could teach her how to break the spell Yun was under. She could save him. This was her edge, the one she'd been missing in the Earth Kingdom. We have to go to North Chongling, she said. Rangi slammed her fists on the table, clattering the empty dishes. The frustration building inside her since the beginning of the discussion had finally boiled over. Are the two of you listening to yourselves? She shouted. The palace was attacked and you want to go on a wild spirit chase. Kyoshi's optimism was too fragile to withstand any debate. She needed Rangi completely behind her, not throwing up resistance. How else are we going to get the old Yun back? She snapped. Kyoshi, he killed 4 people and defiled the palace. After what he did, there is no more old Yun. She couldn't believe this. I'm telling you, he's possessed. Rangi's chair screeched as she rose to her feet. And a day ago, you weren't even sure of that. Lieutenant, Heiran said, control yourself. No, mother, I won't. Her choice of words was a retort to Heiran's use of rank. I'm not going to sit here calmly and listen to you entertain Kyoshi's wild guesses about spirits instead of coming up with a defensive plan for your own safety. I know you both feel terrible for what happened to Yun. I do too. But after what we all saw, it would be utterly foolish to treat him like anything but the danger he is. There was only a limited amount of room on the balcony for Rangi to pace back and forth, but she made do. I mean, he shouldn't have been capable of half the things he did last night. He infiltrated the capital, murdered Lu, and single-handedly foiled the entire security force of the royal palace. It doesn't make sense. Yun is a diplomat and a talented earthbender, not some kind of trained killer. He is, Heiran said. He is a trained killer. Rangi was caught in the middle of launching the next volley of her tirade, her finger crooked to the sky. What? As methodically as if she were donning armor before a battle, Heiran readied herself. She took several deep, controlled breaths. And then she told Kyoshi and Rangi a story about Yun they had never heard before. Immediately after finding Yun in Makapu, Jianzhu started to fret. Daofei and corrupt politicians alike had profited greatly from the absence of the Avatar. Kuruk's early death showed how disastrous it could be for the world if the cycle were renewed at the wrong time. Yun needed to be able to defend himself from attempts on his life. His physical safety wasn't Jianzhu's only concern. The new Avatar's legitimacy would be attacked with every underhanded trick in the book. Yun and his allies would inevitably suffer from slander, extortion, theft of secrets. He would have to maintain constant vigilance against attempts to destabilize his era of avatarhood. Yun's enemies would come after him as spies, sowers of chaos, and assassins. And in Jianzhu's eyes there was no better protection than to make sure Yun possessed those same skills himself. That had been Master Amak's role in Yokoya, Heiran explained. The mysterious waterbender had perfected his craft in the dark corridors of Ba Sing Se, where smiling princes attended feasts together by day and waged hidden wars of secrets and daggers against each other by night. Master Amak had not only trained Yun to resist poison, but also taught him how to use it. Atuat's brother had instructed him how to eliminate enemies with knife and bare hand. The lessons had been limited to theory, but like in every subject save firebending, Yun had shown to be a talented student. Kyoshi tried to reconcile what she was hearing with the boy she knew. Yun had abhorred Jianzhu's butchering of the Yellownecks, but he'd also mentioned how much he enjoyed learning from Master Amak. Jianzhu must have been slowly working on moving Yun from the abstract to the practical. He wanted another gravedigger, and was willing to be patient to get it. I turned a blind eye because I thought it would be best for the Avatar's protection in the long run, Heiran said. I am so sorry for what I allowed him to do to Yun, she'd told Kyoshi. She hadn't been referring to bending training. Rangi was quiet, and she was cold. No heat emanated from her body. Her face was like ice covering a river, frozen to a thickness that masked what flowed underneath. She despised assassins. When pushed to the brink, Rangi had allowed the Avatar to work with outlaws, but there was no world where she compromised her morals and her honor like her mother had. A spirit didn't turn Yun into a monster, she whispered to Heiran. You did. I'm sorry. Rangi grabbed the table by its corners. She rose to her feet, her back muscles flexing as she lifted the heavy piece of furniture, dishes and cups sliding over the lacquered surface, and hurled the entire setting over the edge of the balcony. The morning air was heavy before the crash. By the time the table hit the ground below, and the sounds of wood groaning and porcelain splashing like raindrops reached them, Rangi was already leaving. Heiran made no move to stop her daughter. She sat across from Kyoshi as if this were a normal occurrence, a standard outburst. With nothing between their chairs to occupy the space, Kyoshi felt overexposed. Is anyone hurt? Heiran asked calmly. Kyoshi glanced over the railing and shook her head. Heiran pointed her chin at the door Rangi had vanished through. You should go talk to her. You might be the only person who can right now. I need you to confirm something first. Heiran read the tightness in the Avatar's frown. Kelsang didn't know. We took great pains to conceal such matters from him. He would have confronted the rest of us earlier had he found out. Kyoshi was grateful to hear it, but in no mood to forgive. And then maybe the rest of you would have killed him sooner too. She didn't bother looking for a reaction in the older woman's eyes to see if she'd successfully wounded the last living member of Avatar Kuruk's companions. She got up to go look for Rangi. Kyoshi ran into Jinpa first. He already knew a delicate situation was afoot. Mistress Rangi is in the stables, he said. I was grooming Yin-Yong when she came in and offered to assist. She, seemed like she needed solitude, so I let her take over. She told you to get lost, didn't she? Jinpa shrugged. I negative-jinged it out of there before my robes started smoking. Just make sure she doesn't yank my bison's fur out by brushing too hard. Kyoshi followed his directions down the halls of the palace until she came to another garden-facing exit. It revealed a freestanding longhouse that smelled of fresh-cut hay. A gaggle of stable hands idled at a distance from the building, looking confused about what to do with their hands. Kyoshi knew they'd been ordered away. Where they stood marked the edge of Rangi's blast radius. She went to the largest pen and saw Yin-Young, his fluffy bulk taking up most of the room inside. His saddle hung off his back at an angle, and only one side of his fur lay smooth and flat. He grunted at Kyoshi as if to ask, "Is someone going to finish the job?" The sound of sniffling gave away Rangi's location. She found her by Yin-Young's second and third right legs, sitting on the hay-strewn floor, tucked into a ball. Kyoshi's instincts were to lean down and wrap the smaller girl in her arms. "Why didn't you stop him?" The kind of sharpness in Rangi's tone was rarely ever aimed at Kyoshi, but now it was out in full force. "Who? Jianzhu?" "Yun!" Rangi looked up, her eyes red. "I saw how close you got to him at the party and you did nothing." Kyoshi knew she was only lashing out from anger, but it still wasn't a fair hit. "Nothing?" He was standing in the middle of a crowd of hostages. "So you waved your fans at him. Good try. You're the Avatar, Kyoshi. Did it ever occur to you to try bending? You had so many chances to drop him by force and you didn't take them." She had no response for why she didn't try fighting Yun with water or air. Hurting him with the elements, like she'd reflexively done to so many Daofei and hatchet men, hadn't occurred to her. Looking back on it, even her strokes with her fans had been slow and hesitant. The shame inside Kyoshi twisted into something hurtful. What should I have done then? Kill him in cold blood like I did Zhu Ping An? Put him down like a rabid animal? He's our friend. "Well, I'm glad you still have room to debate," Rangi shouted. "I no longer get to decide how I feel about Yun. He took that choice away from me. What if he hurts you, Kyoshi? What if he attacks us again and you hesitate and he hurts you?" Kyoshi punched the wall over Rangi's head. "He wouldn't." Dust trickled from the ceiling, catching the rays of the sun peeking into the stable. From where she sat, Rangi's voice turned smaller and younger. "You have a hole in your robes that says otherwise. If I had convinced you not to wear your armor, we'd be in a very different place right now. You'd be seriously injured or worse, and it would have been my fault." She lowered her eyes and curled her knees closer. "I couldn't live with that any more than I could live with losing my mother again. I just got the two of you back." Kyoshi slumped to the ground beside her. "Rangi, I swear to you I will do what it takes with Yun. I won't let him harm anyone else, especially not your mother." Rangi examined every inch of Kyoshi's face, looking for sincerity. She wiped the growing wetness from her own eyes before it became tears. When she opened her eyes in Atwat's hospital, "I started to hope the past was done with us," Rangi said. "I thought we could begin moving forward, like how the traditional Avatar calendar counts the days. Did you know it's technically the 6,454th day of the era of Kyoshi?" Counting the days by where they fell in an Avatar's life was a formal and archaic method of timekeeping. It was mostly used by historians or trotted out during certain spiritual ceremonies. "Doesn't feel like it," Kyoshi muttered. It didn't seem like her avatarhood had ever legitimately begun. They sat there for a long time, saying nothing, wishing things were different. Kyoshi broke the silence. "You threw a table off the balcony." Rangi laughed, a strangled noise of release. "I am in so much trouble. I could have killed someone, in the royal palace no less. What if the Fire Lord had been walking underneath us? I no longer hold the title for worst breach of manners in the Four Nations," Kyoshi said, "and I am never, ever going to let you forget it." Rangi reached over and took her hand. Red scars traveled down Kyoshi's wrist in wavy, branching patterns like the veins of a palm frond, a token from when she'd fought the lightning. "For as long as you live?" Rangi asked solemnly. Kyoshi smiled and nodded. "For as long as I live." Rangi pressed her lips to the healed skin on Kyoshi's knuckles. The kiss sealed a promise to always give each other a hard time for the rest of their days. If Kyoshi held any longing for the past, it was for those simpler moments, when she was Rangi's greatest and only headache. "Avatar? Lieutenant, are you in there?" Zoryu called from outside. "I request your presence regarding a certain matter." Rangi's head shot up from Kyoshi's shoulder. They looked at each other with growing panic. Maybe it had been a historically important table. They sidled past Yin-Yang out of the pen. The attendants had been dismissed. The Fire Lord waited for them, wearing a lighter morning dress version of his robes. Kyoshi wondered if it took as long for him to put on his clothes as it did for her to don her chainmail. "I didn't acquit myself well last night, immediately after the incident," Zoryu said to her. He fought the urge to look at the curling, pointed toes of his shoes instead of maintaining eye contact. "I should have taken command of the situation. I should have been the one talking to you instead of Cheijin. I swear, when it comes to my brother, I feel like my wits leave me. Certain people, they turn you into who you were before." Zoryu had his flaws, but he was a ruler who cared about his nation. With Kyoshi's help, he could grow into his crown. "You don't need to apologize," she said. "Good, because apparently strong Fire Lords aren't allowed to." He sighed. "I've been speaking with my advisors, and the situation remains dire. The only chance I have of keeping the court from turning on me is apprehending Yun." "Then we want the same thing," Kyoshi said. "I will find him for the both of us." "Thank you, Avatar." He bit his lip. "That's not the only reason I'm here, though." He stepped aside to reveal Heiran standing behind him, with Atwat by her side. The two women were stiff-backed, as if ceremony had suddenly intruded its ugly head again. "What's the meaning of this?" Rangi said. She recognized something she didn't like in her mother's posture. "Atwat is my second, and the Fire Lord is my witness," Heiran said. Without her cane, she slowly, carefully sank to her knees on the grass. She reached behind her and unsheathed a wickedly sharp knife. "No!" Rangi started forward. "Mother, no!" Heiran pinned her daughter in place with a glare. "After what I've done, you would protest?" "Consistency, Lieutenant. No one gets to escape the consequences of their deeds. This was a long time in coming." She grasped her topknot with one hand and placed the edge of the knife on it carefully. "For failing to recognize the true Avatar," she said, holding Kyoshi's gaze. "For not protecting my friend Kelsang." Heiran looked to the Fire Lord. "For letting my former pupil dishonor our nation." And finally, Rangi. "For not being worthy of my daughter's esteem." With one swift stroke, Heiran lopped off the bundle of hair and tossed it on the ground before her. Her dark silken locks, salted with grey strands, billowed down her face and neck. Rangi shuddered as Atwat carefully picked up the severed topknot and folded a clean silk kerchief around it. She'd lost her own hair once, but that was due to the underhanded tactics of an enemy far away in the Earth Kingdom. Regrettable and traumatic, but more akin to a war injury. Heiran had acknowledged her personal dishonor right in the beating heart of their own country, in front of the Fire Lord. "It's done," she said to Rangi with a sad smile. "You hold this family's honor in your hands now. You'll take far better care of it than I have." With a few more flicks of the knife, Heiran cropped the remainder of her hair to match the severed ends, making it shockingly short, yet somehow still neatly fetching around her beautiful face. For this family, doing things cleanly and properly applied to everything, including rituals of ultimate humility. Atwat took the knife from Heiran and helped her up. In a way, the doctor made the ideal second. She would do as her friend requested, without the hesitance of a noble of the Fire Nation might have at seeing one of its most illustrious figures fall from grace. Rangi, on the other hand, was apoplectic. She had been robbed of her righteous momentum, had her pockets picked. There was nothing she could say any more to her mother in anger. Heiran let her daughter flap and fume another minute before deciding they'd wasted enough time. Letting witnesses have their say, even family members, did not appear to be part of the topknot severing ritual. "All right then. North Chungling." She peered inside the stable at Yin-Yang. I see you haven't saddled the bison correctly. 5 people will cause the floor to shift. What do you mean 5 people? Rangi managed to spit out. What do you mean North Chungling? We didn't agree to go there. You were upset we weren't discussing a plan for my safety earlier, Heiran said. Well, standard operating procedure after a target comes under attack is to move their location. You should know this well. It's how you protected the Avatar from Jianzhu. Heiran turned to everyone. We are going to hide out in North Chungling, she declared. While we're there, Kyoshi can make contact with Kuruk's friend to follow up on any spiritual leads to find Yun. It'll kill 2 spider snakes with 1 stone. Brother Jinpa, have you finished gathering the supplies? Jinpa teetered around the corner, crates and burlap bags stacked high in his arms. I have, headmistress. We can be in the air in 15 minutes. Heiran had commandeered Kyoshi's secretary the same way Rangi had. Rangi stared at Jinpa, furious at his betrayal. He simply shrugged as if to say, Scariest firebender wins, before sidling into the pen next to his bison. We haven't discussed our options, Rangi said. We have to take into account your condition. She'll be fine, Atwat said with an uncomfortably cavalier wave of her hand. Fresh air and movement will be better for her health than cooping her up in the palace. She survived the trip home, didn't she? But... Rangi looked to Kyoshi for backup. It seemed like she wanted to avoid a flight with her mother at all costs. But nothing, Heiran said before the Avatar could weigh in. I may have no rank now, young lady, but you are still my daughter. I am telling you that we are going on this trip, and I don't want to hear any further complaints spewing out of your mouth. Now, hush! Young lady? Kyoshi had seen the headmistress give the lieutenant orders before, but this was some kind of new and frightening relationship that had been unshackled. Rangi's mouth bent into a shape Kyoshi didn't know it could achieve. I'm officially an Avatar's companion, Atwat whooped, throwing her fists in the air. The sudden noise startled Yin-Yang into squashing Jinpa against the side of the pen. I'm going to get one of those fancy ink paintings of us commissioned for posterity. Heiran was already inspecting the sections of Yin-Yang's code Rangi had worked on. You call this grooming? She said, aiming her disapproval at her daughter. It looks like you used a body brush instead of a dandy brush. It'll have to be redone. All of it. Somebody help me! Jinpa pleaded from the other side, his voice muffled by his own bison's fur. Soryu watched the proceedings, gripped by horror and dismay. I was going to give a great big speech about how the fate of my nation rests on the shoulders of this group, he said to Kyoshi. A bag tore open, scattering grain everywhere. Yin-Yang roared in delight and began lapping it up, nearly knocking Atwat down with his tongue. We'll, be careful, Kyoshi said. Rangi and the others had to go back to the palace for a few more things. Heiran cornered Kyoshi while she was straightening Yin-Yang's saddle blanket. The 2 of them were alone in the pen. It's not enough and you know it, the older woman said quietly. Kyoshi kept her eyes on her work. What isn't? My hair, my honor, they're not enough to balance the scale. Heiran busied her hands along the saddle so it would look like they were talking about something else, something trivial. There is no escaping the past. Yun is the sins of my generation come back to haunt us. One way or another, he will catch up to me. She cinched one of the buckles tighter. Rangi may view this trip as traveling for my protection. You see it as a search for clues. But from my perspective, we're luring Yun away from the palace, out in the open. I am coming with you to act as bait. Kyoshi started to protest, but Heiran would brook no argument. You will use me to draw Yun in. You will let him kill me, if you have to. I don't think you have a good chance of capturing him without a sacrifice. Rangi would never allow, which is why I am talking to you right now and not her. The stability of the Fire Nation is more important than any life, than my life. She gestured at her shortened hair. The other reason I cut my topknot is so that there will be no further disgrace to the country if he kills me. An honorless person does not need to be avenged. I can bear any insult, because there's no more person to insult. Heiran was as even and steady as the earth they stood on. As far as I'm concerned, I don't deserve to escape Yun's wrath any more than Jianzhu deserved to escape yours. My death might actually close the books on this nightmare, an upside I'd accept without hesitation. The fake work reached its limits, and they turned to face each other. My daughter would never listen to me on such matters, Heiran said. But I can trust you to do what needs to be done. Right, Kyoshi? Caught between two family members, Kyoshi didn't know what to say. For the sake of Rangi, she should have refused Heiran immediately. But the headmistress's chilling logic was brutal and elegant at the same time. It boggled Kyoshi how easily Heiran came up with the trade. Heiran took her silence for an answer and patted her on the shoulder. Good girl. Καλό βράδυ.